Hey there, business builders. It's a strange twist of fate, but sometimes the very thing we love, the business we've created or the career we've built, can become the thing we hate the most. Well, buckle up, because today we're talking with clinical psychologist Samantha Young about what to do when our passion becomes our poison. Well, welcome to the Business Builders Podcast. We are your hosts. I am Brenton Gowland.
And I'm Ron Tomlin.
And today, Ron, we've got a really interesting topic. So obviously, last episode, we started a new series, and that series is called Life-Work Balance.
I like that.
So do I. And we've had some really interesting responses to that. It seems we've come onto a topic at just the right time.
Hit a nerve.
Hit a nerve, or maybe something that's just floating around in the back of people's minds. Because I know that when people have listened to the podcast and got back to us, they've said that we really need to hear something like this at the moment. It's really topical. I know that I had some people who've never listened to the podcast before say to me, oh, I really want to listen to this series. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Why is that? And literally it's because, well, life-work balance is on their minds.
Yeah, it's topical because of what's happened with COVID. It's topical because of the economic situation, not just here, but overseas. And the best part about today's podcast is that you just don't have to listen to Brent and I droning on about it. We've got a guest.
We have, and we'll introduce our guest in just a moment. So look, anyway, we're carrying on this series, Life-Work Balance, and today we're going to be talking about something with our guest who we'll introduce in a moment. She's a renowned psychologist and a CEO, so we look forward to introducing her. But we want to talk about when your passion becomes poison, because sometimes you have to really think about the problem before you can come up with a solution. But just think about it. Business builders who listen to this podcast, people who we assume, if you're listening, that you really want to work on yourself to build your skills so that you can build great businesses that make a difference in the economies that they're in, businesses that, more importantly, make a difference to our own lives. But sometimes that thing that we've created becomes the ball and chain around our ankle, which causes us a lot of grief and distress. And it's really sad when that happens, because when passion turns to poison, people's lives can be turned upside down.
And I think it's good that we start with some of the consequences of getting this life-work balance thing wrong.
Yeah.
And stress and burnout are definitely some of the downsides of not considering or not putting into place at the forefront of your thinking this concept of life-work balance.
Absolutely. And so we'll get our guest to talk about that in just a sec. But before we do, let me introduce to you today Samantha Young. So look, we're thrilled to have Samantha with us today. She is not just a scholar, but she's a practitioner serving as the CEO of Human Psychology. It's one of Adelaide's largest psychological service providers. And Samantha's journey is really fascinating, and it's also inspiring. Her career spans from consulting at Boston Consulting Group to managing sales and marketing for The Body Shop. What a huge divide and difference of skill that is. She has also been a strategist for Meyer Grace Brothers. So lots of experience Sam brings to us today. This blend of commercial and management experience paired with her psychological expertise provides Sam with a unique perspective to her practice. Sam also carries with her an impressive academic portfolio, including a master's degree in clinical psychology and an MBA from Melbourne University. But what truly sets Sam apart is her commitment to human potential, a passion that fuels her work every day. And at Human Psychology, Samantha and her team are dedicated to helping others embrace change, embrace self-awareness, build stronger relationships, and develop resilience. So it's not just about overcoming challenges, but it's thriving amongst them. So with that, I would like to introduce to everyone, Sam. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me on, Brenton and Ron. Hi, everyone.
Absolutely our pleasure to have you with us, Sam. And that's a pretty impressive portfolio of work experience you've got there. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about yourself before we get started in your own words?
I think I almost feel uncomfortable talking about myself. Can I talk about human psychology and the team?
Please do.
Because it's an amazing team of human beings, and we were established in 2007. So we've been around a while. We now have 25 clinicians working from 3-4 locations around South Australia. Mm-hmm. And our mission is to help people to think, feel and perform better. So we couldn't be more passionate about the topic of wellbeing and preventing burnout, because we see probably 10,000 people a day in different aspects in training and one-on-one counselling, and we would much prefer to prevent mental health issues than try and treat them. So yeah, this is my core passion. That is why I'm here, is to talk about wellbeing.
Fantastic.
Now, one of the downsides, Samantha, of getting that life-work balance wrong is burnout. And it's a serious consequence of having that balance out of balance. Can you explain to us and for our business builders exactly what burnout is and how it manifests itself?
Of course. I think people have some misconceptions about burnout. And I was reading just this morning that we had the great resignation, great quitting, all of these catchphrases in social media. But the one that hasn't been discussed is the great burnout. And reflecting on coming on here today, I think the reason is we need to give ourselves permission to talk about this topic, but it's somehow taboo. And I don't know if that's an overhang from COVID, where we just toughed it out and got on with it. And now everything's fine. It's gone. We're fine. It's all fine. And if we just don't talk about it, then it might go away. So burnout is something that happens progressively over time to our energy levels. And not only to our energy, but to our passion, to our sense of intrinsic motivation and meaning and purpose. So it's got 3 components according to the World Health Organization. So it's not a clinical disorder, right? It's a syndrome that can turn into a clinical disorder. So think of it as DEFCON 2 before you're about to go to DEFCON 3.
I love that analogy.
So feelings of exhaustion, and it's that I'm just kind of done, physically and emotionally knackered. Increasing mental distance from one's job. So you're starting to feel disconnected, cynical, negative, even resentful of your business and the team. And then reduced professional efficacy. So your productivity's declining, cognitive function's declining, and you're just starting to get caught in this downward spiral. So that's burnout.
Fair enough. So not a clinical, what do you call it? A clinical
It's a syndrome.
condition.
It's a syndrome, not a clinical disorder. So if we went to the DSM-5 and looked it up, it's not in there yet, but it is a recognised precursor by the World Health Organization that you are starting to go down the wrong railway track.
Right. Okay. So precursor, that's an interesting comment, right? So precursor to what?
It could be business failure. It could be failure of your mental health. It could be failure of your physical health. It could be failure of your marriage and close relationships, but like it's not a good train track. And I think people think burnout comes from just simply working too long, too hard for too long. And it's more than that. It also is around values, and you start losing your why, and it becomes very, very hard to get up in the morning.
Well, that's really interesting. I love that DEFCON 3. Sorry, I've already taken us up to a further level. I love that example because I don't know about you, Ron, but I've experienced some of that before, and that progression.
Oh, I don't think there's any question that probably everyone that's listening has either experienced some or all of those symptoms to a greater or lesser extent. And to me, when that sort of thing starts happening, that's when I know it's time to get out of the office and get on a holiday, as we talked about before. But if you haven't experienced that, I should say, if you haven't started to put in place some mechanisms for that, I can see it, going down a rabbit hole of problems.
How far have you got? Because DEFCON 5, I imagine, Samantha, is where we fall off the cliff, right?
Yeah.
So how far have you got on the DEFCON chart before?
Oh, I'd say up to 4.
Yeah. I've definitely got up to 4 because we had the pre-chat earlier and I said there was at one stage in the business that I was running that I had to leave the office. I remember walking down the local mall. I'm going to be really transparent here. And I remember touching my neck and my heart was going brrrr, and I sat down in the middle of this crowded mall and just thought, this is it. And I slowly got up and walked across to the hospital and told them what was going on. And they, of course, immediately checked me out and said, you're having a panic attack. And I remember thinking I was going to be done toast. And I remember other times just having to leave the office and think, sit in a paddock and just be away from people because you feel this overwhelming weight of all these decisions that you're making when you're basically backed into a corner. So I've definitely been to DEFCON 4, touching on 5, but thankfully, somehow I've got back down to 3 and 2, and hopefully now I'm sitting at a non-warning state, which is that DEFCON 1?
Yeah, let's call it DEFCON 1. Yeah.
So look, you've mentioned obviously what we've just been talking about. The burnout isn't simply about working too long or too hard, but it's that progression. It's that ongoing stress. Could you elaborate on this and perhaps share some examples that highlight these aspects of the build-up?
So let's think of it as the boiling frog experiment.
Ooh.
So don't be trying this at home, please. But imagine you have 2 frogs and you drop one in boiling water. It will obviously jump straight out.
I'd be jumping out straight away too.
If you put a live frog in blood temperature water and slowly turn up the heat, it will go to sleep and die because it doesn't notice the gradual change in its environment. So let's take your average business owner founder. You're pumped initially. You're working night and day. You're passionate and your stress hormones are jammed on. That's what's actually letting you do that. But that's fine because when you're exhausted, you just think about the goal and the vision and the team and the people. Yeah. But then you overcompensate with willpower, caffeine, alcohol, and adrenaline. And that's when the problems start, but you actually might not notice. So you're running low on adrenaline, noradrenaline, activity hormones. And each time you have to upregulate, it's getting harder. So then you speed yourself up and there's this almost manic, compulsive busyness feel to it. You're doing all the things and you start getting a bit irritable and you start getting a bit forgetful and you start losing your temper when you wouldn't normally, and your productivity starts to decline. And so your self-confidence starts to decline. And leaders are meant to have all the answers. Leaders are meant to be okay all the time. And you're not, but who are you going to talk to about it? Because you need to seem strong for your team and you don't want to worry your family and friends. You're always tired. You might lose or gain weight and you're always grumpy. You're not sleeping well. And that's when we're starting to get potentially into clinical symptoms. Depressed mood, hypervigilant, anxious. And there we are. We've gone down the spiral.
Yeah. And I think there's no problem with running on adrenaline and passion for a while. But I think there's a kind of badge of honor. I can do things that no one else can do. I only need 4 hours sleep. I can, all that sort of thing.
We glorify it.
And we do. We put people up on a pedestal because they can do these things that no one, they're superhuman, but they're not. And what was interesting for me is that I spoke to someone about 10 years ago about what he called carrying an allostatic load. And you can look that up if you're interested. And he said that there's a badge of honor about it, but there's a downside. And if you continue to carry this load, it can decrease your lifespan significantly. And what's more important, and I think relevant to a lot of business leaders who don't see this as anything more than a little bit of extra stress, is that it significantly reduces your productivity. You take twice as long to make decisions and your capacity for reflective thinking is almost zero. So you're very busy and you're doing stuff, but it's not very productive.
Well, I think we're a bit delusional, Ron, that we kid ourselves. We tell ourselves I'm fine. And if I was to invite you wonderful gentlemen to play Russian roulette with me right now, what would you say?
No.
Excellent answer, right? So you wouldn't do that in physical life, but we do it with our well-being. So we gamble. And the analogy I want to use is revving a manual car. Okay. Yep. So I want you to picture me at 18, my first car that I bought was a manual car, and driving down Main Northeast Road in my new manual car, except I didn't know how to drive a manual car. And I was pulled over by the police, and I want you to picture a sobbing, pathetic 17-year-old. And instead of booking me, he said, I'll teach you how to drive the car so you can get home. And he said, don't redline. And I said, why? And he said, if you redline too hard, you'll blow the engine up. So good to know mechanically, right? But we do it all the time with our well-being. Okay.
Yes.
And we let the needle just stay in the red and we get away with it. And we go, I can get away with this. It's fine. How do you know when the engine's going to blow?
I can't answer that.
When it's back on the road, when it's too late.
Oh.
When it's too late. So this is what we do with burnout. We ignore it. We avoid it. We're in denial until it's too late.
Interesting. That's like your frog experiment. Do you know what white coat syndrome is?
Blood pressure goes up.
Yeah. So every time I go to the doctor, that happens. And on my last visit, she said white coat syndrome is something we measure now because it's like you get a rock and you get a hammer and you start hitting the rock. Every time you have that white coat syndrome experience and your blood pressure's going right up. It's like smashing the rock with a hammer. So at what point does the rock break? Eventually.
When you find out it does.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So she said, we still measure that. And I'm like, damn it, now I have to get my brain right and not get white coat syndrome. But it's the same kind of thing that I'm hearing, is that there's this pressure that builds up. And the scary part is, like you're saying, is we don't know that it's happening until it's too late. And I think I shared with you beforehand, I saw my mother have a complete mental breakdown when she was in her 40s. She was catatonic in a chair for probably 2 to 3 months. And my brother and I were instructed that we had to constantly give her massages and so forth, so she felt human touch. And the doctors gave her audio tapes and different things, positive reinforcement to listen to, like hypnosis, telling her she was a good person and that she could get herself out of this. And my mum's a very strong woman and she got out of it, and she's a lot older now. But she said to me a while back, Brenton, it's like I feel a wave coming on. I can feel the symptoms when they're approaching now because I recognize it. And she said, I know what to do. I know that I need to start my positive reinforcement, meditate, do all these things, and I can get it under control. But it took her years. Once she went over that tipping point, you were talking about her life completely changed, and she had to then manage this new condition. Whether it's clinical or not, I don't know at that point, but it sounds like you said it was a syndrome. The lead
Burnout,
up,
yeah.
The lead up was like a syndrome. And then once we go over that cliff, we've got a diagnosable condition of some sort. And it's, Russian roulette as to what that condition might be. But at very best, it's your business fails, which is a terrible thing. But then if your health goes with it too, that's the rest of your life.
Exactly. And I think COVID took a toll, certainly in Sydney and Melbourne when you talk to people there, but, globally. And I think we've all bought into this idea that it's gone and that our resources are renewed and everything is great.
And everyone's trying to get people back into their offices again.
Yeah, when we talk to workforces, people are tired. They are reporting feeling disengaged. They're reporting feeling malaise. And these are the early warning signs.
Interesting.
So you've given us some insight into the negative effects of burnout in business in terms of if it goes any further. How does it impact productivity, things like sick leave and overall physical and mental health?
The first thing I'd say is, as a leader, as a business owner, you're modelling. So your people are watching you kind of in a spooky, stalky way all the time. So firstly, your behaviour is modelling your genuine commitment to wellbeing. So take my advice, I'm not using it, yeah? So if your self-care practices are poor, that's what you're communicating to your team. So firstly, that's going to impact productivity. Then burnout impairs our cognitive function. So if your brain is in a fight-flight, DEFCON 3 state, the connectivity with your prefrontal cortex is kind of gone. So that impacts your decision-making, your concentration, your short-term memory, your emotional intelligence, your social skills. And so you get in a productivity spiral then because you're working harder and harder for less and less return. So I think it impacts our workforce both directly and indirectly. And then it impacts our ability to do our job as a leader and a business owner.
So with what you're saying, those impacts then would be real in creating sicknesses and having people not coming to work, days off, all that kind of stuff, especially if we're modelling poor life-work balance. Our staff are going to suffer, right?
Well, I noticed my staff's leave balance is gone. Their sick leave balance is gone.
Interesting.
And it's that perfect storm of flu, RSV, COVID, and their families, so taking leave for their children. And, I've got team members that have been sick for 6 months, because, and maybe it's long COVID, maybe it's just compromised immunity, but you're coming off a low base then. So if you think of resilience spiraling or wellness, spiraling, it's like a leaky bucket. So you've got to put resources back in. You can't just keep drawing indefinitely on resilience. And that's what business owners think they can and should do. And they have to accept they're human. They're having a human response, and we've all got a finite capacity.
And so business owners have got all those pressures in the background driving them, but then they're driving their staff to sickness. And so is this a common thing with people when they're sick leave, when it's used up? What do they do then? Do they just come into work because they need the money, or do they not come and not get paid?
Depends on their job. So my daughter's a paramedic in London and they've been told not to test for COVID so they can come to work still.
Wow.
Which is pretty horrifying. So if you've got a policy where people can't come to work sick and they can't work from home, they're not getting paid.
Yeah.
Which is then cost of living at the moment compounds financial stress. And it's tough out there at the moment.
So it takes a pretty special kind of boss to actually, a trained boss, someone who understands the impacts of burnout, to become that filter for our staff then. And that then puts pressure on us.
It does.
So how many, without getting into detail, how many leaders do you see versus people from workplaces like employees? What's the ratio to leaders versus employees?
I think that's hard to say because I think it's a different presentation.
Okay.
I think that comes down to spheres of control and what the stressors are.
Yeah.
So a stressor, if I am an emergency department doctor, is going to be very different to the stressor of CEO of a mining company. So, and then we don't know what's going on in people's personal lives. So everyone's got different stuff going on in their personal lives. And one thing I've learned I won't say how long I've been a psychologist, but a long time, is that you never know what's going on in other people's lives ever. And so we don't know what other stressors are layering in the background that could be feeding into that burnout equation.
So for companies and business builders who care, what's the canary in the coal mine? What can they look for? How do they get better at detecting the signs of potential burnout in themselves, but also in their people?
I'll start in reverse. I'll start with their people. So I'd be looking at metrics like absenteeism, change in productivity, looking for changed, sustained behaviour at work. So the warning signs like someone's become more irritable or tearful or taking more sick days or not hitting their targets. So there'd be sort of the quantitative ones. But qualitatively, it's like ask people, like start the conversation. How are you? And genuinely wait for the answer. You can kind of tell when someone's not themselves.
Yeah.
And it's about making it safe from a psychosocial safety point of view for people to feel they can be honest without being penalised.
Is this why there's a big push on psychological safety at the moment? Because I notice everywhere I go, everyone's talking about psychological safety.
That's more legal. So it's now legislation that if you as a business director, owner, CEO are aware of risks to psychosocial safety in your workplace and you fail to take reasonable management action, you are now breaking the law.
Well, that's a good thing.
I think it is, absolutely, because it's what's reasonable, which is a tricky legal term, but you need to identify, assess and mitigate as far as reasonable those risks. And a lot of businesses aren't doing that.
And taking that a step further, I'm sure there's a ton of staff that don't feel like they can take a break even if they are sick or they've got issues and so forth. And that's just putting more pressure, more loading up that burnout trap even further.
And I don't think it's just taking breaks. It's people not taking annual leave. It's people checking emails on their phone after hours, 24/7. It's people watching the boss work 60 hours a week and then getting an email from the boss on a Saturday and feeling they've got to respond to it. And resourcing's tight. So the sense of this relentless chronic overwork, I think, is definitely present at the moment.
I saw this article in The Advertiser, I think it was a few weeks ago, where it actually talked about it's okay not to respond to the boss at 3:00 in the morning. It was this whole thing of bosses doing exactly that and causing people stress and grief, but it was kind of talking about you got to teach them how to treat you. It's okay to say no outside of work hours.
In some workplaces, it's not though.
Interesting. Can you give us an example?
I can neither confirm nor deny, Brenton, but in some workplaces there is a culture of overwork.
So, but you're saying it's a culture thing,
yes,
right?
It is
That's
a culture
not
thing.
right.
It's not right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's lots of food here for thought. If you're listening and you're resonating with any of this, because I know that some of the things that have been said, I'm thinking, yep, that's me. That's me. Oh, I do that. I'm guilty of that, particularly not taking holidays, which we talked about last week.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting one because the next thing you were going to move on to, Sam, was about me, as an individual business builder. How do I look for the signs in me? But an interesting conversation I had with someone the other day who's a business leader, runs his own business. I asked him when was the last time he had a holiday? And he said, started to look a bit sheepish. And I said, well, look, let's just look at how many weeks annual leave you're owed. We worked out there was 65 weeks annual leave he was owed. Didn't even look at long service leave. It's pretty telling that if you're not taking leave, there's probably a certain pressure on other people not to do it either. And this gentleman suddenly realized he probably had a number of people who were candidates for burnout apart from himself. He hadn't realized it because he never looked at it.
Shall I circle back to some of the warning signs for people?
Yes, please, sir.
So I think sleep is the canary in the coal mine. So either difficulties getting to sleep because you've got racing thoughts, waking up a lot during the night, early morning waking, which is like, 4 a.m. without an alarm and you can't get back to sleep, or frequent nightmares, or some people's excessive sleep. So 12, 15 hours a day and it's this escape sort of thing. So you feel fatigued most days, drained, overwhelmed. Then you start procrastinating and not delegating as much and going to those sort of low urgency and importance tasks rather than the big meaty ones. We've talked about cognitive impairment, so troubles concentrating, forgetting, lack of productivity, physical symptoms. So it could be the chest pain like you experienced, Brenton. It could be frequent headaches or stomach upset. You might feel depressed or anxious. They are recognised as mental illnesses in their own right, obviously. Irritable, cynical, socially detached, self-medicating with, we like to call them maladaptive coping mechanisms.
So we're talking alcohol?
Coffee, too much caffeine, which if you've already got a racing heart isn't going to help. Any of those sort of self-medicating drugs like alcohol, caffeine, nicotine.
I remember once I went to the doctor with something like that and he asked, Slay, how many coffees do you have a day? Oh, 7 or 8. He was like, yeah, you might want to cut down. That was back when, I remember every second meeting we had, it was, do you want a coffee? And you just do it naturally.
But doesn't that show how we're propping up our biology with artificial stimulants, right?
It really does, but it becomes part of work culture.
So some of the things I want people to think about causing burnout, you know that you don't have much work-life balance and you tell yourself that it's a choice and that when the business is, some moving future target that is going to happen one day, but just right now you have to invest everything in the business. But it's like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That never comes.
What do we call it? Sweat equity.
Sweat equity. I love that. I haven't heard that.
Oh, that's a common kind of thing that particularly entrepreneurs say that they're not getting paid enough. So they put in sweat equity because I'm putting in sweat equity now to get payback later.
Yeah.
And they
increase the value of my business. I was just speaking to someone earlier today.
Who used that terminology?
And it did indeed.
Interesting. Because sweat equity has no guarantee of payback.
And it's interesting to then think about where your locus of control is. So,
do you want to just explain what that is first?
Are you running your business or is it running you? And
what's the locus of control?
Locus of control is whether or not you feel you have agency over what happens to you.
Gotcha.
And if you start losing that internal locus of control, you're actually going to end up resenting your staff and resenting your business. And to me, that's then getting into you are in burnout. And I know there'll be people listening, owning businesses, running it, going, oh, yeah, I've heard myself say if it wasn't for these damn people and clients, this would be a great business, yeah?
Yeah, I've experienced and seen a lot of that kind of stuff. But I think of my own language. I've even said on this podcast to Ron, there's been times where I've thought my business was a ball and chain around my ankle and it stopped me from traveling or it stopped me from this. Because I've always said, my responsibility is to feed X amount of people, so you feel that weight of responsibility upon you. So it becomes this thing everyone says, well, I don't want to work for a boss, for someone else, because I don't want someone controlling me. But like it or not, whatever you do, something will be exercising control over you in some fashion, whether it's the tax man, whether it's the ability to pay people, whether it's whatever it is, there's some sort of factor that will be within your realm.
Well, I think that's the difference. It's whether it's influence or you perceive it as control.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also think it's being genuine about our priorities. So I think our time and money follow our priorities, and that's a really hard one to argue, right?
Yeah.
And there's this stunning book called 5 Regrets of the Dying.
Great.
And it's written by a palliative care hospice nurse, Bronnie Ware.
Fabulous book.
It's fabulous. And it sounds depressing, but it's very life-affirming, and it's giving us an opportunity right now to learn the lessons people have told her on their deathbed. And the only time work is mentioned is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
We only just spoke about that in the last episode. What's a life well lived look like?
Exactly. And it's relationships, it's joy, it's experiences. It's not about whether I got the title or the office or the promotion or the BMW or,
Perhaps people who have those experiences make better leaders and make better business builders, to be honest, because traveling's like another university degree altogether. If you go and visit different places around the world, it brings you broad experience.
I think the other thing that happens though is when we're in the fight flight as we're going up the DEFCON stages, the sense of urgency becomes out of control and we catastrophize. And I must do this. I have to, this very urgent black and white rigid language sets in.
Yes.
And we stop delegating because it's just quicker and easier if I do it myself.
Yes.
It's going to take too long to get someone to do it.
Yep.
And the distance we then feel in our relationships makes it hard to be vulnerable. And how many leaders feel comfortable going, team, I'm not doing okay at the moment?
Not many, but that's starting to change. I think there's education growing around that, but it's still needing a lot of work.
I think so.
And to that point, you were saying that tomorrow is Are You OK Day?
It is. And the whole point of that campaign is to raise awareness about mental health, that in our lifetime, one out of two of us will have mental health struggles, not necessarily a clinical disorder, and 20% of your workforce at any one time is dealing with some mental health stuff, right? So it's about destigmatizing mental health challenges and then just starting a conversation with people.
So if you're a business builder, if you're a leader, if you're a CEO, if you're anyone within a listener group that's resonating with this today, Sam, what's your advice to those people?
I think it's about standing in the hall of mirrors and getting real, getting honest with yourself about how am I tracking right now? And there's heaps of ways of doing that. You could ask the people around you that are often witnessing it. There are apps you can go onto with wellbeing checks. Beyond Blue's got a whole section of even business health checks, and free resources. But diagnostic, where am I on the DEFCON? And then you need a toolkit that is going to help you get the bounce back up.
Okay, so let's say on the area of advice that you're recognizing some of these symptoms in your own life. So you've got the sleep problems, you've got the stresses, you're overworking, your internal dialogue has started to change, all of the things that you've been talking about. If you're starting to recognize that, how do we manage that without getting to the stage of burnout? How do we work with what we've got and start bringing ourselves back down from DEFCON 4 to 3 to 2 and so on?
So starting with self-compassion, and that you are a human that's allowed to have this reaction because it's really normal. I read a stat this morning, I couldn't resist sharing this with you. Small business owners say that managing their businesses is 4 times more stressful than raising children. That's a lot, right? That's
Sometimes
pretty stressful.
You feel like you're spending more time with your business partners than you are with your actual partners.
Well, you actually are. And so then you need to make a commitment to yourself that this is not how you want to live, that this is not how you want your life to look. My youngest daughter's in year 12 and she was choosing university degrees the other day. And I think she'd be an amazing psychologist, right? And she said, I'm not doing that. And I said, why not? And she goes, I'm going to work the way you've worked. I don't want my life to look like yours. Ouch, right? And I said, no, that's because I'm a CEO, like I run a company. It's not from being a psychologist. And she goes, oh, can they have nice lives? Psychologists, can they? So from the mouths of one's teenager, getting feedback from those around you can be pretty clarifying.
Confronting is the word.
Confronting, yes.
It sounded like feedback you get when you're not looking for it.
Yeah, I really sat with it though. I really sat with it. So it's about, back to our priorities we talked about, is your health and well-being a priority? And if you ask most people what's most important to you in life, they will not say that first.
No.
They won't. If you're lucky, they'll say my family, my friends, then my business. And somewhere right down the bottom when prompted, they'll go, oh yeah, and my health. Yeah. Whereas it should be at the top.
Until you get a health problem.
Well, it's not selfish. Self-care is not selfish. It's necessary. It's why you put your oxygen mask on first in a plane. Because if you go down, the whole plane goes down.
Yeah, but you notice when people get sick, particularly if they're a bit older, that's all they talk about.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're talking about is people who are predominantly well. They don't realise because it's silent. It's like you were saying about your car. You don't know it's got a problem until you break down.
Yeah, exactly.
It occurs to me that we're in a world with so much knowledge. There's no lack of information so that we can actually learn how to run this body, this person, this thing that we're contained within, if we're getting metaphorical, very well if we do the research.
Well, interestingly, if you have an asset, thinking about business builders, businesses, there's not a business builder, not a business owner who wouldn't maintain their assets, but they've just said that's irresponsible.
Correct.
And yet the greatest asset you have, other than the people in your business, but that's often a platitude, the greatest asset you have is your health.
It is.
And that includes your mental health. And as you said before, you cannot help, you cannot work with or for other people unless you're capable. And so
I think, diagnostic, where am I? And then get help, get support, whatever that looks like for you. I don't presume to know people's social networks and what support looks like for them, but reaching out for and accepting support can be really scary. And that vulnerability makes us feel completely out of our depth. And I think in Australia, a lot of the time, weak. We perceive it as being weak rather than it actually is one of the strongest things you can possibly do. And then you got to consider change is hard. So what can you delegate, drop, do differently? Not just tasks, but how you're thinking about your business. Because all of you, I know everyone listening that runs a business is trying to engineer it and architect it such that the business is not dependent on them.
Yes.
What percentage do you think of leaders have pulled that off?
5, 10 maybe.
So why? Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question. It takes a lot of resource to get to a point where it's not dependent on you. And some of the businesses I'm working with, I'm watching people try to separate themselves, and it means a lot of hard decisions on their part as well. It also means trusting other people. That's difficult.
I think a lot of it comes down to ego.
Tell me about that.
I don't want to think that I'm not indispensable. I'd like to think that the whole thing runs on me because I built it, because I want it to be that way. And every time I've sort of stepped away, things have gone wrong. It's not my fault. I'm just better than everyone else. And I need to keep asserting that. And I think people build up this idea of they're the only ones who can do things, as you said before.
Well, that's self-worth right there.
Well, it's self-worth in a kind of deranged way, in my opinion. It's not saying I'm worthy. It's I am the only one who can do this.
It comes down to fear, because I think most behaviour does.
Yeah.
And if you strip back and go, well, what's the underlying fear? It's fear of losing the business because we're so invested in this. It's ours. It's in our DNA. And to let that go is painful. So I actually sold human psychology in February.
Tell us about that.
To APM Group.
Yeah.
So they're a $2.5 billion ASS listed wellbeing
Congratulations.
entity. Thank you. And so that was back in February. And I'm the CEO. And it's, if I'm not careful, my mindset still is this is my business and I'm running it the way that I always have. And it's really been quite interesting trying to recalibrate how I approach the business. It's not mine anymore. And I'm much healthier for it because I've got a different mindset because it's not all on me.
So what's your perspective then? Like, how has your perspective changed? Because how long ago did you sell it? You said February. So what's that, 6, 7 months?
Mm-hmm.
How has your perspective changed since you owned it and were going through the process of selling it to now? Because how long do you have to continue? I would imagine you have to work for that company for a period of time.
Hopefully, yes.
There would be usually when you have a sale, you have to work a couple of extra years.
I have to work at least another year, but I'd probably like to stick around.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So how's your perspective changed then?
The best example I can give you is payroll. No, seriously. And you check your bank account and you're like, we've got payroll coming up and it's X tens of thousands of dollars. And I don't feel that same cash flow stress anymore because I have a parent company. I also have an amazing group CEO that I can pick up the phone and go, hey, this is happening. What do you reckon? And I'm actually getting now, I've got support around me, whereas it felt quite isolating before.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just access to resources. And also this is not my company. I just have to keep telling myself it's not mine. And you can actually feel the weight lift. So it's not a judgment I'm making of business owners when I say how invested they are, but I think for the best thing they could do for their well-being is work out how to get this thing to run without them investing literally their well-being in it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's sweat equity in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what I see there too is there's this maturity of thinking, because when you talk with business people, we talk about the fact that we build a business to sell it. Like all the books that I know that I've read talk about, you start with the end in mind. So I want to be able to sell this for X million dollars and I want to be able to make a life from that. And then what's next? Well, I think that way anyway. Some people want legacy. I know that that's a thing. I probably am not that guy. I'm the guy who wants to build a thing and sell it and do another thing. So I think what you've done is literally perfect, because that level of experience that you now have from going through that whole cycle is very helpful, particularly in what you do.
Being an employee, though, it hits different.
How?
It just feels different. It feels lighter. It feels, on the weekends, I'm not working every weekend now.
Yeah.
And am I more productive? Yes. Do I have better relationships with my team? Yes. I'm letting myself be more strategic. I'm carving time out in my diary to be not as billable. So I'm kind of doing the things now as an employee that I should have done as a business owner.
It's interesting that there will be some people listening to this who will say, yeah, that's fantastic. I know what to do now. But just because business leaders know what to do doesn't mean that they do it. So how do you get people to prevent burnout or think about this stuff before they get to the crisis stage?
Okay, so let's talk about self-care. So we always go back, strip it right back to fundamentals: sleep, diet, exercise. Yeah. Now we all know what to do. Everyone listening, a smart, capable person, and there's an inverse relationship between self-care practices and stress. So have you noticed that the more stressed you are, the more likely you are to not go to the gym, to eat badly, and to not sleep?
Absolutely.
So, and it's about your present self winning over your future self. So let's say we got home tonight, it's been a long day, and there's a bottle of wine on the counter and Netflix is queued. And do I either A, pull on my gym gear and go for that run, or do I open the bottle of wine and sit numb watching Netflix?
So you've been to my house.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I've got some good Netflix going on at the moment. Has anyone watched Alone, the series on SBS?
Not yet.
So they drop 10 people in the west of Tasmania and they have to survive on their own. And I would last, I think, 48 hours because there's no relational connection. They literally start going crazy, right?
So they're literally on their own. They're not with those 10 people.
Yeah. So what we need to do is override the desire for dopamine, which is the little buzz you get when you get notifications on your phone. You know, it's like gambling. That's what poker machines are, for serotonin. Serotonin's the slow burn. Dopamine's the spike. So you have to convince yourself just over that threshold to go for the run. Because how are you going to feel if you go for the run?
Great at the end of it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel smug. And I do. I always feel smug if I've exercised. I'm like, yay me, well done. It makes you feel good, endorphins, and it burns off stress chemicals. So set yourself small, achievable goals that are built into your daily routine, okay? And once you get those under your belt, so it might be, I'm going to take a lunch break. And I know that sounds like really trivial. Do you know how many people do not take lunch breaks?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go for a walk.
And again, this is part of the culture. It's sometimes for some people a badge of honor. I don't do lunch. I don't take lunch breaks. I work through.
What a legend I am. Yeah. Look how hard I'm working. I know it sounds really Oprah, but mindfulness meditation practices. So I want you to think about formal relaxation, letting go of tension.
As I said to you, I saw my mother and I saw the effect that meditation had on her. I'm a total believer in that now, but it's because I've witnessed it and I saw how it changed that. And I realized it helps me as well, just to change my thinking.
And take back control of your calendar. All right. So I want you to go through your diary from the last month and look at how you've used your time, how you've allowed your time to be used, and how much of that is in strategic, deep thinking, adding value to the business, and how much of it wasn't, and ruthlessly re-architect how you invest your time.
Yeah, doing trivial stuff gets back to that allostatic load that we were talking about and the busyness. I can keep myself busy all day, but is it actually doing anything?
Well, biologically, we're actually not designed to be busy all the time. And it's become an almost badge of honor in 2023. If you ask someone how they are, they go, oh my God, I'm so busy. As if it's good. And if you said, look, I literally just sat around all weekend and stared at the sky, people would think there was something wildly wrong with you.
Well, they make heroes of Elon Musk, and I'm sure he's done great things, but he famously talks about how he sleeps in his factory or works around the clock. And that's the only way he will get things done. And maybe that's how he can work. Do you find that there are people and individuals who can do that?
No, not without a cost. Everything's got a cost. Every choice. So my mum used to say to me, choose your behaviour, choose the consequences, right? He will pay a cost for that. So back to priorities, yeah? What are your core values and how do you align your choices with those values? And if you're genuinely saying well-being's a priority, then you've got to walk the talk.
You know, all of this is backed by research. And I think the one that had the most effect on me when I first read about it was the Harvard study about what's most important in people's lives. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about success, and we'll certainly do that as one element of this life-work balance concept, when we talk about success, most people will say, well, having good relationships, it is the thing that makes you happy.
Well, we're in a loneliness epidemic. So when you look at risk factors to longevity, you've got obesity, diabetes, smoking, there's all these health factors. Loneliness is equivalent. So loneliness will kill you as quick as those things will. And so if we're investing all our time and energy and creativity in building our business and leaving nothing for the rest of our lives, then it's going to be a very empty looking life.
Do you know what the key thing I hear from business leaders about running a business is? Particularly if they're a person at the top of the business and there's not a board, it's how lonely it is. So I was doing some interviews with people the other day, and this owner of a rather large organization was saying they've just employed a CEO to come run the business. And I'm like, hats off to you, fantastic. And now they obviously become the managing director or whatever it is, but they said that I'm looking forward to someone I can share the stress with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to someone that I can talk about the things that have kept me up at night.
Yeah.
And I think that's telling.
And I think if you're a business leader, business builder, and you don't have someone to talk to, there's plenty of mechanisms out there nowadays. I run these tech groups and I do coaching with people, and it is the number one reason that people join a group. They rationalize it by saying, I'll improve my performance, I'll improve my effectiveness. But the truth of the matter is, it's someone to talk to.
And I bring us back to the very first episode we ever had was about 6 ways to improve at business networking, right? And I bring us back to that whole networking thing, being able to network with peers and like-minded people, but doing it in such a way where you don't have to be selling all the time, actually finding running partners. And I think that whole aspect of business, the networking part, is so important for way more than just winning work. It's actually to be able to find people you can talk to, people that you can bounce things off of, people that can be confidants. And groups like your tech group are an extension of that. And other groups that are around, I'm sure there's plenty of them.
Oh, yeah, there are.
I mean,
and quite frankly, the reason there's a proliferation of those groups is because there's a need for it.
And I'll mention what this is, but there's a group called Mates in Construction, and we'll get this guy to come along and speak because I've spoken to him a number of times, and it's no drama that I'm speaking about this because he speaks about this in front of crowds of 1,000 people. He was suicidal for a whole bunch of time, got through it. It was detrimental, of course, to his family, but his wife and he stayed together, and she went through all the torturous kind of activities and thinking and darkness that went on in that situation. But they then formed Mates in Construction because they realized that in the construction industry, there's a lot of people that are probably the same. And as you said, Sam, everyone was quiet about it. And so people suffer on their own. And then unfortunately, and we've had people that all of us in this, the three of us, because we know each other, we know people who have taken their own lives in the past couple of years who have been great business people and no one ever saw it coming. And you think, wow, what's going on? But this Mates in Construction thing is another example of what you're talking about. There's groups everywhere that are forming that you can get help from. And I guess that leads us, look, I think I'm feeling that I want to just keep talking about this because this is really interesting. And I find myself aligning with a lot of the things that have been said. I think I'm back down at DEFCON 2 now. So I'm much happier with where I am, but it's taken a while. And if you're listening to us today and you're at DEFCON 4 or 3 or even 2 and you want to get back to 1, what advice would you have for the business builders that are listening? So we talk to business builders, people who want to work on themselves to build their businesses. What advice and tips would you have for the people listening today about how they can, the best few things they can do to either get help or start bringing that DEFCON level down?
Okay, 3 things. I think one is reconnect with your leadership purpose. And if you're just running this business or building this business to sell it, then that's going to be really stressful and really difficult. There needs to be some intrinsic motivation in there as well, that you feel like you're making a difference, that you feel that legacy idea that you mentioned before. Then ask yourself, is this behaviour consistent with my desired professional brand? So I asked one of my team how I was coming across at the start of the year, and they said, you're rushed, you're busy, you seem unavailable. And obviously my first response to that was, yeah, but you don't understand. No. that was irrelevant. My defensiveness and justification was irrelevant. That's how I was coming across. So soliciting feedback, particularly the type you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic advice.
And then implement a personalized self-care toolkit, all right? A preventative toolkit. What are the things you're going to commit to doing that are going to keep your energy levels replenished and keep your well-being high, all right? That's a totally individual thing, but what are the things that you need to start doing, stop doing, do differently that are going to genuinely reflect self-care? And self-care can be really ugly. Like self-care could be getting rid of toxic relationships. It could be sorting your finances or tax department stuff out, but a genuine commitment to putting your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And self-care is not about indulging in behaviors that you find enjoyable but aren't doing you any good.
No, it's not running a bubble bath and lighting a candle, hashtag live, laugh, love. No, it's not. It's deeper than that. And how you talk to yourself as well is self-care.
So where can you find resources to help you build a kit like that?
Oh, look, honestly, if you go onto the App Store and put in wellbeing, it will explode with thousands of free and paid apps. Beyond Blue has got some fantastic resources, and the Black Dog Institute specifically for businesses. And there's links on there for small business owners, and there's a whole bunch of funding that's just gone to small business owners where they can get free coaching and mental health support. So yeah, go to Beyond Blue and put that in and start the journey.
Okay. And when we were talking and getting prepared for this, you said that if you've gone over the edge and you've experienced burnout, then you can actually recover.
Of course.
Now, we don't have time to go into that today, but I would love to have you back. And maybe for the next episode, should we just continue this on?
I'd love to.
Great, because I think this is really valuable. And look, if you're out there listening today and you want to connect with us, we have a LinkedIn group. It's called the Business Builders Podcast. Get on there and just ask to become a member, and we'll accept you and put you in, and you can make any comments you'd like, ask any questions you'd like.
And maybe I can give you the links to put on there, or the resources that we've just mentioned.
That would be excellent. I'd really appreciate that, Sam. And I think our listeners would incredibly appreciate that too. So we will continue this series on. And I think even in the discussion we've had today, it sounds like, Ron, we need to do an episode on sleep, an episode on holidays, and a whole bunch of other things in there to get this whole topic kind of rounded out. But I think it's going to take a little time.
It's worthwhile because it's something that's important to people. And as Sam was saying before, it's something that isn't talked about enough.
Agreed. And if you are listening and you do need help, as we said, being a leader is all about leading by example. So reach out to someone for help.
And if you're in Australia, Lifeline is a fantastic resource, which you can just Google to get the number for that. And don't forget, tomorrow in Australia at least is Are You OK Day.
Correct. This podcast will be coming out in a few days, so we'll be post that day.
You can still continue the conversation.
Yeah, great. Well, look, thank you, Sam, and thank you for listening to us. But we're going to sign off for today, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.